In this diagram of the spinal cord, the first thing I want to discuss is the fact that the spinal cord itself is part of the CNS, the central nervous system. You have information going into the spinal cord and leaving the spinal cord via the peripheral nervous system. And this is via these structures right here, all of the spinal nerves. So information going to the spinal cord is going to be afferent information, and information leaving the spinal cord will be efferent. In addition to information coming in and going out, in and out of the spinal cord, we also have information going up and down the spinal cord. So in the next slide, I'm going to start color coding these signals and looking at a more in-depth diagram. So to color code information now, we're going to talk about sensory or afferent information coming in is going to be blue, and efferent or motor signals leaving the spinal cord are going to be red. Efferent signals leaving the spinal cord that are going to autonomic effectors, we're going to have green. So we have sensory information coming in blue, we have somatic motor leaving in red, and autonomic motor in green. Now let's take a look at a transverse section of the spinal cord. Again, going back to the concept that sensory information coming in to the spinal cord is going to be blue, efferent signals leaving the spinal cord are going to be red for the somatic nervous system, and they are going to be green for the autonomic nervous system. I want to compare these two diagrams, but first of all, let's orientate ourselves. This is the anterior and this is the posterior. This is the anterior and this is the posterior. The terms that we are going to be using are ventral and dorsal. So I want you to note that the information coming in and out of the spinal cord via the PNS is the spinal nerves. Now in this diagram, the spinal nerve has been cut quite short, but that would be it right there. So again, information is coming in and out, and you note that the spinal nerve has ingoing and outgoing signals. However, once it gets past that spinal nerve, it then branches out into structures, and you can see them here. It comes in, and then it branches this way, and it branches that way. On this diagram, it's branching this way and that way. And these structures through which the neurons pass are called roots. So here you have a dorsal root, and here you have a ventral root. So on the next diagram, we'll take a closer look at that. If we follow the path of information, the sensory information, in blue here, the sensory information is coming in via the posterior or the dorsal root, and the efferent motor signals are leaving via the anterior or ventral root. The way I always just think of this is that it's coming in the back door and leaving the front door. Once again, looking at this diagram, information would be coming in here via the dorsal root, and then it would be leaving via the ventral root. The point at which both afferent information and efferent information is combined right here, this now is the nerve. So the roots only carry afferent or efferent signals. The nerve, on the other hand, carries both. Note that not all afferent neurons are going to connect directly with the efferent and may involve interneurons, illustrated in purple here. Whenever there are these synapses involving integration or even connections between the afferent and the efferent, it's all going to be occurring within the gray matter of the spinal cord. And it's that butterfly structure. And just note that all these are called horns. So there's a posterior gray horn, there's a lateral gray horn, and there's an anterior gray horn. Recall that cell bodies in the peripheral nervous system, in the PNS, are found in areas called ganglion. Now let's take a look at where the cell bodies of the sensory neurons are. They're all right here, in this little bulge. And note that this structure is called the posterior root ganglion. Okay, so that contains the cell bodies of the sensory neurons coming into the spinal cord. Note that the efferent signals the cell body for these are within the gray matter, and they are not in the actual root. So there is no anterior root ganglion, there is only a posterior root ganglion, because the sensory neuron cell bodies are found exterior to the exterior to the spinal cord. Remembering from the first slide, not only does information come in and out of the spinal cord, it may go up and down the spinal cord. So now let's take a look at that, and that's what's illustrated here. We have information coming in and then going up the spinal cord. Or we have information going down the spinal cord and then out. Note that information going up and down the spinal cord is carried by structures called tracts. This is going to be white matter, myelinated axons. So ascending and descending tracts, white matter going up and down the spinal cord. Comparing these two diagrams, here is a sensory ascending tract. So it's come in via the dorsal root. It is then going to go up the spinal cord via a tract. Shown on this diagram, you can see that the color coding has stayed consistent. It is now blue. So this would be ascending information going up the spinal cord. Efferent motor signals coming down the spinal cord, okay, are shown here in red. So this would be information descending down the spinal cord. So we have ascending tracts and we have descending tracts. Note on this diagram that these tracts are found in the white matter of the spinal cord because they're myelinated axons traveling up and down, and they are in areas called columns. So we have a variety of columns: lateral, posterior, and anterior. So the tracts are found within the column. So we have ascending and descending tracts within the area of the spinal cord, white matter, called columns. So tracts are within columns, they're white matter, they're taking information up and down the spinal cord. So to summarize, we have information coming in the spinal cord. This is going to be sensory information, and it is coming in via the back door or the dorsal root. It may or may not form a synapse once it gets into the spinal cord, and that is going to be in the gray matter in the horns. Efferent signals are then going to be sent out. Okay, these are going to be efferent motor signals via the ventral root. So in and out via the roots. Once the information gets into the spinal cord, it is then going to either ascend or it will descend, and this is going to be within tracts. We are going to be having motor efferent tracts or sensory afferent tracts, and these are in areas, white matter, within the spinal cord called columns. So the tracts within the spinal cord, the columns, this is all part of the spinal cord. This is all part of the central nervous system. Information coming into and going out of, which is then going to combine to form the nerve, is part of the peripheral nervous system.